This is the first week of the fourth quarter. We have 2 more weeks where we're going to be talking about human biology. This week we will be talking about the endocrine system, which is a complementary system to the nervous system. And then next week we will be talking about immunology and infectious disease. So first of all, let's take a look at a comparison between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Both are in charge of controlling homeostasis. However, to do that by means of the nervous system alone would require a very highly active nervous system with significantly more nerves in play and continuous impulses in those nerves. And so, instead of that, the hormonal system was developed because the nervous system needed to be isolated for the control of rapid assessment and response. And the nervous system most of the time includes things that we would consciously control, whereas the hormonal system primarily would be things that we would not consciously control. So the endocrine system was created by God in order to complement and work with the nervous system to establish homeostasis. And essentially, the prevailing factor is that the endocrine system does things over much longer periods of time, minutes to hours to days, as opposed to seconds to minutes. And those controlling factors are much more sustained than the nervous system. So the types of glands in the endocrine system, there are essentially 2 types of glands. One is called the endocrine glands. Endocrine glands manufacture the products within the gland and then secrete that gland directly into the blood, whereas the exocrine system or the exocrine glands manufacture the product, but they secrete the product into a duct, or they secrete the product outside the body. So these, for example, the pancreas, one aspect of the pancreas is an exocrine part where it secretes its makings into the pancreatic duct, which is secreted into the GI tract, whereas another part of the pancreas, it produces, say, insulin, which is secreted directly into the blood. So here we have an overview of the various glands, endocrine glands, that are present in the body. From the top down here, let me get my pointer out. We have up here that we have the pineal gland that's in the brain, the hypothalamic portion of the pituitary gland, and then the glandular portion of the pituitary gland, the parathyroid and thyroid glands, which are here, the thymus, which has very little activity in adults but does have activity in children, the adrenal glands, the pancreas, in females, the ovaries, and in males, the testes. Exocrine glands, on the other hand, include the salivary gland in the mouth, the lacrimal gland, tear ducts in the eyes, the sweat glands and the sebum-producing glands, sebaceous glands in the skin. The liver produces bile. The breasts produce milk. The stomach produces enzymes for digestion. The intestine produces mucus, and I've already mentioned that pancreas produces pancreatic juices. All of these, unlike the endocrine system, all of these are secreted into ducts, and they end up in various aspects outside the body. So when we look at endocrine versus exocrine glands produce a material, and they produce it in the gland, and then it's secreted outside the body, either into the GI tract or into the breast milk, etc. Whereas endocrine glands produce the material in the cells, and then that is secreted directly into the blood in the body. And again, these are endocrine glands. This is the thyroid, this is the adrenal, this is the testicle, and this is the pituitary. there's a hypothalamic portion of the pituitary, which is part of the brain, and then a glandular portion of the pituitary. And then the exocrine part, this is the sweat gland, a depiction of the sweat gland here. I think this is the salivary gland. It's not entirely clear to me what this is. And then the liver produces bile, which is secreted into the biliary system. So, hormones act as stimulators, which have a powerful effect at a very low concentration. They are processed in the body and are under constant influence by various factors within the body. They are generally specific for the target organ that they act on, and these target organs have receptors that are chemical surface materials that bind to the hormones. Now, there's essentially two kinds of hormones. There are protein hormones or peptide hormones, and then there are cholesterol-based non-peptide hormones. The pituitary gland is also called the master gland. And the reason it's called the master gland is it's responsible for regulating the function of many of the other glands in the body. There are two segments, as I've stated before. There's a neural segment, also known as the posterior pituitary, and this would be directly connected to the hypothalamus, and then the anterior pituitary, which is the actual glandular portion. The pituitary gland produces many hormones. One hormone is called somatotropin, which is responsible for growth. When it's produced before the epiphyseal plates are closed, it's responsible for increase in height, etc. If it's produced after the growth plates are closed, then it affects specific parts of the skeleton, but does not necessarily change the person's height. Pituitary gigantism is an overproduction of growth hormone prior to growth plate closure. And so these are people that stand 7-8 feet tall. And then a deficiency of growth hormone is known as pituitary dwarfism. Acromegaly is the overproduction of growth hormone in adults after the growth plate is closed. And the reason it's called acral is talking about the acral part of the skeleton, which are essentially the hands, the feet, and the face. And then megaly means enlargement. And so these people have very large, significantly enlarged facial structure, facial bones. They have very grotesque looking faces sometimes, and they have huge hands and feet. The hypothalamic segment of the pituitary, which is shown here, you see that here's the hypothalamic segment, also known as the posterior pituitary, also known as the neural hypophysis. This produces two hormones, antidiuretic hormone, which we discussed when we were talking about the liver, and then Pitocin. And Pitocin is one of the main hormones responsible for when a woman gives birth. You'll hear people talk about putting a pregnant woman on Pitocin. The idea of that is to induce labor and bring out the child. So these two hormones are produced in the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary on the other end, this is on this side. It's the glandular portion of the pituitary. It produces all this, and there's quite a list here. I mentioned growth hormone already. Prolactin is responsible for stimulating the breast to produce milk. Thyroid stimulating hormone is just what it says. It stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroxine. We'll talk about that in a minute. Follicular stimulating hormone is exactly the same. It stimulates the follicles in the ovary, and it varies during this menstrual cycle and helps women to produce the egg. In males, it leads to spermatogenesis. Luteinizing hormone is important for two things in women. One is the production of estrogen, and also it is important in creating what's called the corpus luteum, which is responsible for helping the fertilized egg implant in the uterus. In males, it stimulates testosterone production. ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, stimulates the cortex of the adrenal gland, and then beta endorphins are produced to inhibit pain perception. The thyroid gland is responsible for producing the primary hormone, which is known as thyroxine. Thyroxine is responsible for regulating metabolism, and increased thyroxine increases a person's overall metabolism. Decreased thyroxine, decrease in overall metabolism. So it increases the rate of food, changing food into energy. And then the second main hormone is calcitonin. And calcitonin increases the storage of calcium in the bones. And so it will decrease the serum calcium level. The parathyroid glands, they're called parathyroid because they're anatomically associated with the thyroid. They're four very small glands about the size of a pea that is buried in the substance of the thyroid, and that they produce parathyroid hormone. And parathyroid hormone is responsible for increasing the serum calcium. And so if the calcium level drops, then the parathyroid hormone is increased, and this is caused by the hormone's impact on bone, resorption of bone, as well as decreased calcium excretion in the kidney. So here's what the thyroid gland looks like. And what it shows here is it's wrapped around the trachea like this, and you can reach up on your throat and look at where your Adam's apple is and go down just a little bit, and you can feel the thyroid in your neck. Now, important to understand that normally you cannot feel the parathyroid glands. If you can feel them, then they're abnormally enlarged. But there are two parathyroid glands on each side, so a total of four. An interesting story about the parathyroid is the fact that the way the parathyroid gland was discovered was because people would develop severe hypocalcemia after their thyroid was removed, and nobody knew why. And the reason why was the doctor was removing the parathyroid he didn't even know was there, and the result of that was severe hypocalcemia. Thyroid disorders can be generally endocrine disorders as a general principle, can be lumped into increased amounts or overproduction, or decreased amounts or underproduction. If you have a decreased production in a child or in infancy, it's a disease called cretinism. It causes stunted growth, and in that time of development, the thyroid is important for mental development, and these children are mentally retarded. Hypothyroidism is the same kind of deficiency, except it's in adults. And this generally is diagnosed because everything is slowed down, and the patient has symptoms of that, with slow heart rate, lack of energy, decreased temperature, always cold, feeling cold in a room where everybody else thinks it's normal, things of this nature. Myxedema is a term that's used to describe severe, persistent low thyroid, and this can actually progress to a comatoid state, and people can actually die from this. Hyperthyroidism is exactly the opposite. The person has unexplained weight loss, they have increased heat, they're hot in a room where everybody else is normal, they tend to be anxious, nervous, they're jittery. It's a pretty difficult thing to deal with. A goiter is when there's an increase in size in the thyroid gland, and this is caused by thyroid deficiency or iodine deficiency. And iodine specifically is sequestered in the thyroid and is important in the production of the thyroid hormone.